A breathless gasp, the sound of waves lapping at the shore, and then a wash of half-remembered dreams beneath it all. These were the first sensations the little corpse experienced before the light peeked in through the blackness and, finally, it woke up. It laid still for a while, racking its long, putrefied brain for the answer to the only question it could really think to ask. What's happening? Everything was so distant. All the thoughts that should have been familiar lingered just out of reach, words on the tip of the tongue. Tip of the tongue, it thought. What a strange expression. It knew the word, but couldn't seem to recall what exactly a tongue was. Another dream. The light shone in around a pair of slender somethings. Fingers, were they called? Digging the sleep dirt out of the corpse's eye sockets. It could see them and hear them, but it couldn't feel a thing. Not the scrape of bone on bone. Not the wet suction of the filth sloshing about inside its skull. Not a thing. It watched as if through someone else's eyes, wondering whether this was a normal experience to be having. Cautiously, it tried to raise one of its hands, scoop the dirt from its other eye.
No. No, you don't,"
came a rough voice from somewhere in the blocked portion of the corpse's vision.
"You,"
said the voice, and the corpse's arm was forced back down into the mire.
"would be miles happier to stay in the ground, fast asleep. Hear you me."
Though it couldn't feel anything, the corpse had some vague awareness that it was being held down. An arm pinned beneath a knee, rib cage creaking beneath the weight of someone seated on its chest, head held between two hands, with fingers still digging the dirt from its orifices. It tried to croak out a question, but the parts of it that knew how to speak all seemed to be missing. Instead, it heard its voice sound from somewhere else altogether, surprising in its clarity. Asleep? The fingers picked the last of the dirt from the corpse's eyes.
Asleep, buried, unbirthed.
The voice, the corpse could now see, belonged to a figure dressed in rags and hunched beneath the weight of several bulging sacks tied to its torso. It stared down through the hollow eyes of a wax mask.
"Didn't mean to disturb you, honest. But you know, what is it they say? Occupational hazard? Best you sit still and let me bury you back up, hey?"
It scraped at the empty recesses of the corpse's eye sockets, rubbed its fingers together in front of its face.
"Yeah, best for both of us. Hear you me."
But the corpse stirred anxiously beneath the masked figure, trying to piece together the discord of scattered thoughts in its mind. Again, the only question that felt reasonable to ask, what's happening? The mask seemed to consider this. It was quiet for a moment.
"An accident, that's what. Didn't come digging around out here so I could make friends. Got what I got, not that there was much on you," it said, patting one of the sacks. "And I maybe got greedy. Shouldn't have gone poking around in your head like that. Never anything worth the trouble in there."
Then, with a long sigh, it shifted off the corpse and squatted in the shallow water beside, proceeding to push handfuls of mud back over its exposed ribcage.
"Afraid this is where the conversation ends, though. Trust me, sleep is better than...
It paused, gestured vaguely toward its mask.
"This."
If the corpse had a brow, it almost certainly would have been furrowed. Nothing seemed to connect with all the washed-out memories. Not where it was, not what it was seeing, certainly not anything the figure had said. It looked on quietly as its bones disappeared again beneath the mud, considering the many questions it could pose and which of them might be worthwhile. "Do you know what a tongue is?" The mask paused again and stared. "As in, tip of the tongue?" The figure began to make a quiet, breathy sound, which turned into laughter.
"Oh, sure, tip of the tongue. Sure, I know that one. Can't say I know what the tongue is, but... just one of those things you're born knowing, isn't it?"
It exhaled slowly, shook its head.
"Queer little mind you got there. You know, I wake you up, birth you from the ground, like they say, then straight away I start to put you back, and alls you can think to ask is if I know what a tongue is."
It began to drip mud back onto the corpse's face.
"Odd way to think. You little ones are always the most strangest. Well, back to sleep you go, eh?"
The corpse propped itself up on an elbow, mud dripping off its bones and pattering on the surface of the water. "Why?" The amusement all seemed to vanish from the figure's voice. It stopped burying the corpse and, with a shrug, rose up off its haunches.
"Don't suppose it matters. You can go back to sleep if you want, or lay here till the sun goes out, thinking about the tip of the tongue and the freckle past the hair and..."
It seemed to run out of words and made a sort of shooing motion as it turned toward the shore.
Thought I'd do you a good turn after ruining your sleep, but got my complexion to keep, don't I? You do what you like.
The figure's rags trailed out behind it, spilt ink on the silver water. The corpse sat up and twisted around to watch, still grappling with the absurdity of things. One moment there had been nothing, not even the passage of time, and then suddenly it was here in the shallow water, wondering how it could possibly know the word tongue when a couple moments ago it hadn't even existed. It looked down at its body, still mostly submerged, touched the crest of its hip, the empty orbit of its eye. It thought of the stained and dripping sacks on the mask's back. Had there been more? Had the figure done something to make the corpse this way? Taken something from it? It turned over in the water, hands and knees sinking down into the soft lake bed. The mask had made shore and was moving into the darkness beyond a stand of blackened spears, which the corpse somehow knew were once called trees. It had no inkling of where the mask might be headed, or if in fact there was anywhere else to head. It thought for a moment that it might call out, but something stopped it. The ghost of a feeling, an imaginary and sickening emptiness in its mouth. It clicked its teeth uncomfortably and started for the shore. The pond, it turned out, was quite a ways from the place the mask was going to. The corpse spent most of the night trailing from a safe distance, afraid that if its guide noticed, whatever this was, this being awake, would come to an end. They passed through an oppressively gray and lifeless expanse that looked like it went on forever in all directions. The monotony of the wasteland was only broken by a single shape that began to creep out onto the horizon as the sun started to rise. It was a skyline, almost, a cluster of short buildings silhouetted against the purpling dawn. As they neared, the corpse realized that the structures weren't quite buildings, although it didn't quite know what buildings were. They were somehow less. Sturdy, weather-worn fabrics stretched across scaffolding like flesh across bone. Most of them didn't even have roofs. Enough to keep out prying eyes, and that was all. Humble construction from afar, but it seemed to blossom as they approached. The fabric walls resolved into swirling monochromatic tapestries, the cobbles a rolling script of etched glyphs, punctuated at each corner by ornate kiosks stacked with trinkets. The city was alive with strange artifice, and there were others here too, all bundled inside plain robes and plain hoods. The only parts they didn't hide away were their masks. Unlike the one the corpse had awakened to in the shallows of the pond, yellowing with age and thin enough to betray the lines of the skull beneath, these masks all shone with a healthy pallor, wax carved into the likeness of faces. What it meant for something to look like a face, the corpse couldn't guess, but the concept was familiar. Their masks had been sculpted into features that it felt it knew, cheeks and lips and eyebrows that would never move. As the corpse meandered between them, they all turned to watch. More than watch. They were starting to gather in the spaces between the dwellings, to flock in beside the kiosks. It was a spectacle to them. They pointed and called for their peers, murmuring excitedly to one another. It heard the word blemish repeated over and over, always with quiet disdain. For one terrifying moment, in the mounting commotion, the corpse thought it had lost its guide. It was a small creature, and the audience loomed at the edges of the street, blocking its view. It started for the nearest corner, but before it could close the distance, the familiar shape of the only mask it knew darted into sight and barreled into it. It expected to be bowled over and trampled to pieces, but instead, the mask swept it off its feet and tucked it under one arm.
You followed me,
the mask hissed, pushing its way into one of the crowded alleyways.
For the sake of pale loves, why would you follow me?
The corpse considered this while bouncing beneath the mask's arm. There were too many questions whirling about in its mind for it to give a coherent answer. Instead, it elected not to say anything at all. As they rounded a second corner, the mask pulled its robe over the corpse. Somewhere beyond the fabric, beyond the general furor, it could hear what sounded like a storm front swelling toward them. The mask made a pathetic sound, something like a whimper. After that, they fell into a long and mutual silence. They ran together until the din of the crowd died away in the distance. The storm was growing louder all the time.
Suppose that's the end of it,
the mask croaked. It pulled away the fabric and spilled the corpse unceremoniously onto the ground. They were inside one of the structures now, pale morning light shining in from above.
Seen it once or twice before, always knew it would happen to me. They get a fix on you, and then they've got the rest of forever to hunt you down. No getting away. Not really.
Away from what? The mask paused. It had been moving frantically about the place, transferring things from its sacks into a larger, sturdier pack, gathering urns, wrappings, unfamiliar tools. It stood still and stared down at the corpse as if hearing it for the first time.
You know, I want to hate you for following me out here, but... well, that'd be fair, hey? Wake you up, leave you without a thought as to what I've gotten you into, and then get all frothy when you try and get a handle on things? I guess you just wanted some answers. Not your fault here.
It rolled its wrist thoughtfully for a moment before giving up and pointing at the corpse's chest.
Occupied?
The corpse followed the finger with its gaze. There, twisting through the dirt caked into its ribcage, was a web of tiny silver lines.
Something's... what was it? Taken root? I think that's what Reverence called it. Something's taken root inside you. And you hear that?
It gestured toward the door flap. The storm had drawn near enough for the corpse to tell that it wasn't one big sound, but a cacophony of smaller ones.
They're not too fond of this stuff. Blemishes, you know? That's what they call them. Things that'll make them... think? Of course, a naked corpse walking all over without so much as a robe or a mask to hide its bones will rile 'em right up. But hear you me.
It slipped a finger between the corpse's ribs and touched one of the white veins there.
Not a thing you could do worse than force them to see something like this. And here I brought you, parading you through the streets.
The corpse slipped its fingers into the cavity of its chest and pressed them into the cracking soil. The webbed lines were as numb as the rest of its body. It knew they weren't meant to be there, but it also knew that it wasn't meant to be empty. This didn't seem right, but it seemed like a good thing. "Is that what I am, then?" said the corpse slowly. Blemish?" The mask shrugged and hoisted the pack onto its shoulders.
Maybe not the word I would use, but I don't know that my views on this aren't terribly important. Here, follow me, it said,
stuffing an overfull sack into the corpse's arms before starting for the door.
You know, why don't you hold on to these questions? If we're going to see tomorrow, we'll have to go somewhere they won't. And hear you me. Any answer I can give you will be a pittance against what you'll get out there. The place is...
It trailed off, shaking its head.
Just you wait, hey? If we make it, and that is a mighty if, there'll be plenty for you to learn.
It was a monolith. It loomed over the landscape, gray and indifferent, with one thin arm reaching from its peak to scrape the sky. At first, it looked like a featureless brick ascending from the horizon, but the closer they got, the more complex it became. Hundreds of tiny black eyes opened up in its flat face, lines dividing them into rows. When the corpse had first seen the city of fabric, this was what it had been thinking of. The architecture had seemed so small and insignificant, but it couldn't remember enough then to understand why. This was what a building was meant to look like. It had known then, and it knew now. The base of the tower was only a skeleton. Its gray skin had been stripped away, leaving nothing behind but red bones and dark innards. The corpse trailed its fingers along their flaking surface as it followed the mask through what had once, it imagined, been a doorway.
Pale loves and rotting bones were here,
the mask said, starting up the crumbling remains of a stairwell. There was tangible relief in its voice, but the storm was almost loud enough now to drown everything else out. The sound of it reverberated through the giant structure, and the corpse knew that if it could feel, it would feel the same. It cast a backward glance through the doorway as it began the ascent, and saw what looked like a crowd rushing toward them. What are they?
Tricky. Maybe more better to ask, what is it? Never was sure myself. Here,
said the mask as they mounted the fourth landing.
Why don't you have a look?
It guided the corpse out of the stairwell to one of the windows in one of the many decrepit rooms. Not far below, a horde of bleach-boned corpses crashed into the building, curling into a skirt of thrashing limbs around its base. The sounds of the storm were their cracked feet and chipped fingertips scrabbling at the earth, their collective wail.
You see what I mean?
The mask leaned out the window, watching with the corpse.
Never known what to think, really. It, them, hard to know what you're looking at.
At first, the corpse only pretended to understand what the mask was trying to say. All it could see was a tight-knit crowd of bodies moving almost in unison. Almost. but there was something strange in their coordination. As the corpse stared, it realized that they weren't just moving together, they were conjoined. Knots of interweaved bone, hips and shoulders fused at odd angles, limbs and faces sunken into white masses of tissue. He clasped a hand reflexively over its mouth, which did nothing to hide the gasp that came after. Whatever it was that had followed them from the Fabric City, it was wrong. Looking at it, the corpse was overcome with a strange sensation, like the entire world was at fault for harboring such a thing. It stepped away from the window, holding a second useless hand over the first. "Thrift," came a voice from behind. The mask turned its head, and the corpse whirled around. Instead of the writhing aggregate it had been expecting to be pouring in through the doorframe, there stood a slender figure. Another mask, this one without a robe or a hood to hide beneath. Its flesh was the same as its face, pristine white wax. "What is this?" it demanded, palms upturned. The mask, or Thrift, the corpse thought. It was called Thrift. Shrugged.
"An accident, that's all."
The new figure looked at the corpse for an uncomfortable length of time, then turned back to Thrift. "This? I can begin to understand the oblitus, though I am not terribly thrilled to see it again. But this..." It stepped closer, jabbed a finger at the corpse. "Accident how?"
"Well, Reverence, know it's been a good long time since we last spoke, but I don't expect you forgot that discussion we had about my occupation, eh?"
Reverence laced its fingers together, thumbs pressed into a steeple. It was silent for a moment, perhaps trying to regain its composure. "Yes, Thrift, I remember. I gather that what you mean to say," it said, aiming 2 fingers at the corpse, "is that you were searching for sleepers to pillage for adipocere, but you weren't careful enough with this poor soul, and now it's awake for good. Yes?" Again, Thrift shrugged.
"Occupational hazards."
"I shouldn't have taught you that expression," Reverend said, shaking its head. It knelt and touched one of the silver lines winding through the corpse's chest. "How much do you know, little one? How much did Thrift bother to share?" The corpse looked from the hollow eyes of Reverence's mask to Thrift's. It didn't know what it was expecting to see in either of them. Just one of the endless impulses it couldn't put to reason. "Nothing, I don't think. Thrift told me that I'm awake, and that it would be better for both of us if I went back to sleep. I saw a lot, though. The Fabric City, the masks who live there, and..." It nodded over its shoulder at the window. "Ah, ghastly, aren't they? Oblitus, they're called. Proof that monsters can be made. Although," Reverend said, thoughtfully, "we may be proof enough ourselves. At any rate," it rose up onto its feet, extended a hand toward the corpse. "You must be terribly confused. If you'd let me, there's much I'd like to show you, much I'm sure you'd be glad to see." The corpse stared at Reverence's hand. It knew the gesture was supposed to mean something, but couldn't decide what. It thought of the way Thrift had treated it, and how much gentler this seemed. It put its hand into Reverence's, and let the hard wax fingers close around it. Reverence laid a second hand on top of it, and for a moment the corpse didn't feel like an accident or a blemish. It felt, simply, like it belonged. As they climbed the steps, the tower transformed around them. Each level was simultaneously more exotic and more familiar than the last. The gray walls and floor began to vanish beneath a trellis of overgrown plants. The rooms began to fill up with collections of meticulously arranged relics. One floor was devoted to mannequins and armatures, all dressed in flamboyant apparel beneath a flowering canopy. Another was sectioned off into spacious cages, which housed a variety of small creatures. And, at the top of the building, the 20th story was an archive, every surface stacked with books and more books, and vines growing between them. In the short time since it had awoken muddy-eyed in the shallows of the lake, the corpse had come to see the world in 2 parts. Things that it somehow knew, and things that it didn't. There had been the masks and the Fabric City, and that thing still making its racket somewhere in the distance. To the corpse, they were the mysteries. The rest of the world surfaced naturally as the corpse experienced it, fragments of a forgotten dream. Almost everything in this tower, the corpse knew the name of. It touched the spine of an ancient moss-covered tome. "What is this place?" Thrift chuckled.
"Big question, that. Bet you've been aching to tell this story for a good long time, eh, Reverence?"
It dropped idly into a bed of ivy and started to unlace its pack, but paused to aim a finger at the corpse.
This is why I told you to save the questions. Might as well get comfortable, eh? You're about to learn everything that ever was, and then some more after that.
Well, not quite, said Reverence. It was doing a poor job of keeping the enthusiasm out of its voice. But yes, it continued, releasing the corpse's hand and wandering to a nearby bookshelf. That is indeed a big question. However, not all big questions have big answers. What would you think? It trailed off, searching the shelves for something. What would you think if I were to tell you that the knot of curiosities in your mind could come unraveled with, one look at the page of a book? That may seem like an ambitious proposition given how confused you must be, but here. It plucked a small, leather-bound journal from the shelf and opened it for the corpse. Tell me what this means to you. The pages were brown, weathered with the passage of time. Still, the corpse could just make out shapes in the faded ink. A drawing framed by pointing arrows and rows of strange cursive script. A drawing of a man. If the corpse had a throat, it would have tightened. If it had blood, it would have rushed to the corpse's head. If it had been alive, it would have felt something. Instead, it stood still, staring at the page, imagining a progression of phantom feelings. Tip of the tongue, it thought nonsensically. Everything it should have felt, as far away as words on the tip of the tongue. The expression didn't seem so strange anymore. Is that me? It said at last, voice quivering. It knew the tears would never come. In a manner of speaking, it's all of us. You, me, Thrift, the thousands in Swimera, that is, your fabric city, even our grisly friend down below. We are, all of us, ex nihilum. For fear of death, we died, made our bodies into puppets, our souls the puppeteers. And most of us, it turned pointedly toward Thrift, spend our eternity trying to forget. We hide ourselves away beneath what we call the pristine flesh, grave wax, in the words of our forebears, adipocere, bits of ancient soapy tissue found marinating in old bodies. Better, I suppose, to craft a new coat of skin than to think each day of what you lost. A philosophy poor Thrift has become rather preoccupied with lately. Haven't you, Thrift? It pretended not to hear Reverence, focusing hard on picking the urns and wrappings from its pack. Even Thrift isn't so bad, though. The pressure to make oneself beautiful, to play at the facade of life, is... Reverence trailed off, shook his head wanly. You see this wax I wear? There is a process for exhuming a corpse. Birthing, it's called. We've come to call our graveyards nurseries, if you can believe it. And when a corpse is taken from the earth, we give it a mask of pristine flesh to wear until the stars fall from the sky. The rest can be hidden well enough beneath a robe. It leaned in toward the corpse, holding up a single conspiratorial finger. But you see, the less one must hide, the more beautiful they become. And beauty is love, and love is power. Walk as the living among the dead, and they will call you beloved, and follow you where you go. Now, your question. Reverence snapped the book shut and slid it back onto the shelf. What is this place? Since you're asking me, I'll call it a memory. I collect pieces of the world that was and keep them here, hoping that someday they'll be safe beyond these walls. But ask any of the others, save for Thrift, I'm sure, and they'll tell you that this is a tower of blemishes, a scar upon the world, food for the oblitus. They crave so desperately not to feel what you felt when you looked at that drawing, they've become forever incensed. They set fire to the trees, uproot the plants, slaughter the vermin and the insects. The passion it had been speaking with leaked out of its voice. It became quiet and touched the dome of the corpse's head with its perfect fingers. And those who can't forget go mad. The corpse thought of the creature throwing itself against the base of the building. It could just hear the storm if it listened, still raging 20 floors down.
You don't have to be mad to end up in that thing. Hear you me. Just gotta walk around without a mask or a robe on. Or,
Thrift held a hand out in the corpse's direction.
walk into town with a bush growing inside you. That'll stir 'em up, hey?
Reverence made a sound that was almost a laugh. If its mask could move, the corpse thought it might have broken into a smile. I'm sure they were horrified. How tragic for them. It slipped its fingers into the space between the corpse's collarbone and shoulder blade. There was the sound of roots and dirt being moved, and then something sprung out from the hollow space. The corpse could see it in its peripherals. A sapling, said Reverence, adjusting the sprig to stand upright. There we are. It stared at the corpse for a moment, seeming to take in the sight. It sighed. Such a shame. It would have been nice to raise a tree here. One of the corpse's hands found the sapling automatically, as if protecting it. What's a shame? Reverence turned its gaze from the corpse to Thrift. You're the one who woke our little friend. Would you care to explain why? Thrift sat still, looking in every way nonplussed by the suggestion.
Honest answer is no, I wouldn't. Not really. Suppose it's fair, though.
It hesitated, shrugged.
Embarrassing, you know. Reverence and we had a plan. Wanted to make the world alive again, if you please. I spent a long time finding the wax to help Reverence into that pretty skin it's wearing. Planned to make it beloved, take it into town, start a good fuss, maybe win some of them to our side.
It stood up and joined them beside the shelf, head cocked to one side, peering into the gap between Reverence's mask and shoulders. It touched the exposed vertebrae.
Got damn close, too. All that's left is the neck. See here?
What stopped you? The corpse said. Thrift turned toward the corpse and touched the surface of its filmy, off-color mask with one skeletal hand.
While Reverence was out here, taking care of this place, I was there, living with the people. Whenever I found enough wax to make the trip worthwhile, I'd bring it out here and watch Reverence put it on. You become quite the artist, eh?
It said, looking over its shoulder at Reverence, who said nothing.
Anywho, you get tired of always being the ugly one. Sooner or later, I stopped making the trips and,
Slowly, it lifted its robe. Most of its ribcage was coated in a shell of lumpy, poorly applied wax.
Got a bit selfish, didn't I? But then I found you, a little corpse with a plant in it. And, well, how about this? When I woke you, I wasn't even trying to find anything anymore. I just wanted to look at you. And then, when I scooped you up in the street instead of letting that monster at you,
it said, extending a finger to touch the sapling,
wasn't 'cause I had to. I could have just run back here on my own, even saved myself some time, I'd wager.
But, Reverence interjected, you have a soul. Not a heart, maybe, but there's a good soul in those bones, Thrift. I know how tempting it is to be like them. I tried myself for a long while. But you know how important our work is. Without us to preserve what is left of the world, everything would be a game of pretend, a sad wax figure play at life. It took the corpse's shoulders in its hands and looked into its eyes. That's why it's a shame that you carry so much beauty in you, little one. If you're ever going to leave this place, we'll have to pluck it from your chest and hide you beneath a mask of your own. The corpse jerked itself out of Reverence's grasp, trying its best to shield the sapling from view. Don't touch it. I don't want to be... It looked at Thrift's gaunt mask, Reverence's perfectly carved features. I don't know perfectly what I am, but I think it's better than what they are. Can't I stay here and just grow up? Well, Reverence said, stroking its chin thoughtfully, I suppose you could, if you'd like, but you know, someday that tree is going to outgrow you, and you'll spend the rest of your days tangled up in its roots. Are you sure you want that? Again, the corpse slipped its fingers into the cavity of its chest, pushed them into the silver veins and dry earth. Yes, I think I do. Reverence and Thrift stared at each other. Thrift shrugged, and Reverence heaved a sigh. To the corpse, it sounded like relief. Very well, Reverence said. You can help me tend the tower, and when the time comes, there will be a place for you on the roof. I think it would be a shame to keep something so precious tucked away with all the rest. Don't you? The corpse nodded.
Oh, well, one thing left, hey?
Thrift tapped its temple knowingly.
You need a name, little friend. What's that thing you're always saying, Reverence? Momentum. What was it?
Memento Mori?
That's the one. Means remember death. Seems right, on account of you're a walking memory. How'd you like to be called Mori?
Mori, the corpse repeated. It thought of itself on the rooftop, basking forever in the sun, wrapped in the embrace of life. It would be a monument to the world that should have been. I like that. Mori. Finally, we did it. We finished Harry Potter month. This theme has been one of our absolute favorites so far, and one of the hardest stories to write. J.K. Rowling is such an incredible writer. We probably weren't quite able to live up to her example, but we did at least live up to our word. This story is one whopper of an allegory. We won't ruin it for you here, but how about we play a game of hot and cold in the comments? Don't be afraid, read as deeply into this as you want, and we'll tell you if you're onto something. Oh, and one last thing before we go, this month we broke 5,000 subscribers. That's 5,000 clever minds, 10,000 curious eyes, and 50,000 busy fingers. Might not seem like much in the vastness of the YouTube-verse, but it's a lot to us. So thanks for sticking around, and thanks for always bringing so much to the table. Each of your comments are worth like 10 on a normal channel. You are amazing. Here's to another year of making stuff up. We'll see you next month. Bye.